Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, David Daniels, who has been here with Georg Jensen, with Folli Follie and the Creuset. Very big expert on Japan, and we're looking forward to talking to you about leadership. David, welcome.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me on your talk.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot of things in Japan, actually, a lot. And so if I think, how did you get here in the first place? And you've stayed in that sort of basic, that consumer-oriented area of the industry. But how did you get here, and what were the first things you were doing when you came to Japan?
Well, to go back on how I got here, I was in Europe. I basically grew up in the cosmetics industry.
Oh.
So I spent 12 years at Yves Saint Laurent Cosmetics.
This was in
the UK
in the
initially.
UK.
Well, actually, first of all, I did an internship in Paris with Yves Saint Laurent. And I enjoyed the internship so much, I never left. Well, the internship went into a permanent role, and I was there for 12 years. But at the end of that year in Paris, I was offered a position in the UK subsidiary as a marketing assistant. So I basically started my career from there. One of my early mentors, who was the managing director of Saint Laurent at the time, said to me, if you want to get on in this business, if you want to get on in consumer goods business, you've got to carry the bag, as he said it. You've got to get out and service accounts and understand how sales work. It doesn't matter if you want a career in marketing. You've got to understand how sales work. And I think it was a very good piece of advice. So one of the first sort of management positions for me after a couple of years as a marketing assistant was as an area manager working for Saint Laurent in the UK, servicing department stores, pharmacies, chemists, calling on accounts, taking stock, talking to the sales girls and so on. And this was my first taste of retail, because we were selling in, but we were also selling through. We had our own staff in department stores. And I love retail. And I come from a retail family. My father spent his whole career in retail. He was the chief executive of Selfridges in London for 12 years. So it's kind of in the blood.
Wow, it's definitely in the blood, yeah.
And so I grew up with Saint Laurent in various different roles. I went back into marketing. I took on a brand marketing as a brand manager, running the men's fragrance business, presenting to national accounts and so on. And then I got to a stage where I couldn't really get any further. I was promoted quite young. At the age of 29, I was made marketing manager. I had a team of 16. That was probably my first proper leadership role.
Right.
We're going to talk about leadership today, which is very different to management. And for me at 29, when half the team I was responsible for were actually older than me, that was a very tough challenge indeed. But
is that the function of Japan? Is a very formal, hierarchical culture. I've never lived in England, but I imagine you've got a lot of formality and hierarchy there as well. Was that a function of that, or was it a function of the company?
I think it was a function of the company, but also certainly at that time, which I guess was the sort of late 80s, it was unusual at my age. My peer group were not in those kind of positions. It was unusual that I'd gone so quickly, and accelerated sort of through the ranks quite quickly, and then of course the formality that you talk about and hierarchical, there is some of that. So I felt that in terms of resistance from some of the older ones. It was like, well, you're still in short pants. What are you doing managing me, telling me what to do?
I've been doing this longer than you've been around, Sonny.
Exactly. I joined this company when you were in short pants kind of mentality. And but it was, that was a very good challenge and good way to cut my teeth, I think. But I got to a stage there where I felt I couldn't really go any further. The person above me, who was the managing director, was relatively young. So I decided I had to make a move. So I'd been there 12 years, and I thought if I don't move, I'm going to end up sort of just staying here in this position forever. And I was ambitious, so I joined Coty, or then it was called Lancaster Group, which is another cosmetics group, and I joined as marketing director, and then quickly took on a role as commercial director, which basically meant sales and marketing. And that business in the UK at the time was in trouble. It was hemorrhaging, it wasn't making money. The global company were really questioning whether the subsidiary was viable. So I got a bit of a shock. I'd just made this big decision to move in my career.
They didn't mention any of this in the interview,
no,
right?
They certainly didn't. But I put a plan together and I presented it to the chairman of the group who was making a visit to the UK. And I said, I believe that we could improve the health of this business. This is how I would do it. And he was interested, and he said, okay, you talk a good game. Go and put your plan into place. And my plan was to basically get back to a break-even within 24 months. It was a painful exercise. It meant downsizing the business. It meant closing a number of stores. It's part of the problem. We'd opened too much distribution. And the more distribution we'd opened, the costs were getting higher, but the sales
income wasn't coming in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had to convince the retailers, there was a lot of chain department stores in the UK at that time, to allow us to cherry pick. You know, a lot of retailers want you to be in all of their stores. You can't just be in their top 3, you've got to be everywhere. And I convinced them that if they could support us through this sort of painful period, then we could expand later on after we had, built up the business. So the strategy worked, and it worked quickly. It worked. We'd achieved what we had set out to within 18 months rather than 24.
Well done. Well done.
So that gave me leverage within the company. I was made managing director of the UK affiliate as a result. And my next step, I'd always had an eye on overseas. I'd enjoyed my time in Paris as an intern, but I was fascinated by Asia, where I'd sort of traveled on holidays, and I wanted more of that, and I was asking for opportunities in the group, and an opportunity came up as a kind of special project. My boss called me and said, we've got a problem in Australia. How would you feel about going to Australia and fixing that problem? I think you could probably do it in 4 months. And I laughed. We'll talk about time when we come to Japan. 4 months, you'll be there. You've got to reorganize the team, put the strategy in place that you did in the UK. I think it's the similar problem. I said, great, I'd love the chance. So I went out to Australia. I was still running the UK.
Is it Sydney or Melbourne? Or?
Sydney.
Sydney, okay.
Yeah. I was a true POM living on Bondi Beach.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's a super apartment there. And yeah, exactly, nothing wrong with that. I very nearly stayed. A number of my friends who I'd been at school with were living out there. And there were similar problems. There were, Australia, a lot of department stores, a lot of fixed costs that go with that and so on. But it didn't take 4 months. It took 6 months as part
I'm amazed it only took 6 months. That's by
I was trying to string
amazing.
it out a bit longer.
Yeah, no, well, that's right. Yes, when it got to the winter, it was time to go back to England, right, when it's summer there.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't fix the problem in 6 months, but I found a really strong general manager to come and run the business. I put myself forward, first of all, and said to my boss, look, I think I'd like to take on this challenge. And he said, well, if that's your dying wish, you can have it, but it's a bit of a pity because we've got bigger plans for you in Europe. So why don't you come back, find the right GM, come back to Europe, and then we'll talk about your future, but Australia can now then be part of your region. So I thought, okay, that sounds like a pretty good offer. I got this fantastic GM in place who's actually still a friend of mine today, who did a wonderful job. and then came back to the UK. And then the next step after that was a stint in Paris, back to Paris, but this time in a full-time management role, basically running trade marketing for the group globally. And that sort of gave my first taste, if you like, of working with the Asian markets. And understanding what a disconnect there was from headquarters and particularly Asia, but not just Asia, also other subsidiaries. There were some changes in the group. My boss, who'd also been a great mentor in the company, left, and I decided, I'd been there 7 years, I decided to leave as well.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English.
And then, I mean, this is what really brought me to Japan. My old boss from Coty joined Georg Jensen, the Danish jewelry and watch brand. And he was based in Copenhagen, and he called me and said, David, I've got a new project for you, because he was the guy who sent me to Australia, actually.
Right.
I said, okay, what's on your mind? And we met up, and he said, I'd like you to go to Japan. And I think perhaps 3 or 4 months again. He always had this idea of time. And my problem with Japan is that whenever I go there as the global CEO, I get a kind of smoke and mirrors show for 3 days. And I go and have some nice sushi, and I get a PowerPoint presentation about everything.
Everything's great.
Everything's great, yes.
No problems.
And then I'm put back on the plane. And the other key factor was that it was a joint venture business. It was a joint venture with Takashimaya.
Okay. Mm.
And he said, you know, they're all very nice people and so on, but I can't really get under the skin of what's really going on. Mm. And I can see when I look at our business in the other Asia markets, we're not really punching our weight. We're not really doing what we should be doing, I don't think. So my idea is to put you in there, he believed I had pretty strong diplomacy skill, and use that skill and hopefully your charm to work with the team and come back to me after 3 or 4 months with a proposal of what you think I should do as CEO with the Japan business. He said, we have a medium-term idea, or medium-term possibly goal, we haven't fixed it yet, to reduce the percentage of Takashimaya's ownership. But they don't seem very happy about doing that. So he'd sort of given me that information in advance. So off I went to Japan. I fell in love with Japan almost immediately. It was,
why was that?
It's it's an incredible place, both personally and professionally. But on the professional side, I think if you love retail and you're interested in brands and the retail landscape, Japan is the nirvana. This is the first market I've ever seen where at 9 o'clock in the morning, in even provincial towns, there are queues of people outside department stores. And then the whole ceremony of retail, of when the department stores open at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever time it may be, you really have a sense of the pride taken in retail here. I don't know if you've ever done that, walked into the store at
I've seen on television.
You've seen on television, the cosmetics, it's usually ground floor, the cosmetic counters. The entire floor are bowing and welcoming, customers in, and it's elegant, it's really, I mean, for foreigners coming here who are in the retail business, they're usually like, wow, you know, we better polish our shoes before we you know, walk in here.
Bit of a contrast to the chaos in America, and they have those big sales like Black Friday or something.
Exactly.
And they're killing each other to get to the bargains, right? Yeah.
So, you know, I was immediately sort of captivated by what an exciting place to retail. From the consumer point of view, the Japanese consumer is the most well-informed consumer in the world. And I think that's still true today. They want to go much further than the brand name. They want to know how it was made. They want to know, of course, you know, all of the benefits. They want to know the history. They want to know the real authenticity of that brand, the history of the brand. And quite often, you may have staff in a store. When that customer walks in the store, the customer may be more well informed than the staff about the brand. They might have been following the brand for a number of years. This doesn't happen so often in other countries. So just that element also means that everybody really has to be at the top of their game. It's no place for retail amateurs. I think there's a number of foreign companies who've made a mistake of thinking that Japan is some sort of, you know, casino where they can come and just make a pot of gold, and you know, there's so much money here, and Japanese like brands and so on. But the truth is much more complicated than that, and you know, the list of failed companies, failed brands, failed retailers who've come here, who've done very well in other countries, but who've come here and it hasn't worked, or some have failed the first time, pulled out, and then come back in and made a better job of it. Some have left it all, you know, completely. Is long. That list is long.
The graveyard of failed retail
really?
exercises in Japan from overseas is big.
Absolutely. I mean, and equally, there's also a long list of amazing success stories, particularly in the luxury sector. But that success doesn't happen by chance. That success has taken a lot of very, very careful work, both from headquarters and from the teams in Japan, really taking the time to understand what the strategy should be, really taking the time to understand how they can captivate the consumer, how they can communicate with the consumer. So going back to me arriving in Japan, I was just captivated by it very early on. I was fascinated by the whole Georg Jensen story, which had a long history in Japan. They were doing an exhibition actually at the Mori Arts Museum, celebrating their 100th year anniversary at the time that I came, which was also very interesting. The team were quite disillusioned. They were very on guard of me. They were very polite with me, but it probably took 2 weeks before I could really have a conversation with anybody. A lot of people pretended they couldn't speak English. Then I would discover that actually, you know, they could. I tried to learn some Japanese words, you know, to be polite. And I worked with the president of the company, who's a very charming man, who was an ex-Takashimaya general manager. And everybody was polite and so on, but quite careful and quite guarded and, you know, very conservative. And, you know, to cut a long story relatively short, I quickly discovered that, you know, this had been a joint venture, really a bit like a marriage that had just sort of gone off the rails a bit. Not dramatically, just over time had lost its luster. The Danish party, the Georg Jensen party, had, I think, left it to hopefully flourish, but hadn't really engaged with their joint venture partner. So Takashimaya had done their best. They'd built up the company. They'd expanded the distribution through their own network of stores obviously, not so many non-Takashimaya stores. But it had then reached a ceiling. And, they're not brand managers, they're retailers, they're very good department store retailers. But there hadn't been a discussion from either side about, well, where can we take this business in the future? And there seemed to be a little bit of reluctance to do that.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now.
Talking about reducing the joint venture share with Takashimaya, let's just reduce your share. Or let's get divorced almost. Didn't sit well. I mean, for Japanese, I probably get the saying a little bit wrong, but somebody said to me many years ago, with Japanese, you have to build them golden bridges to reverse over. Make sure they're golden.
Yeah, golden bridges to reverse over. I haven't heard that before. That's a great expression, actually.
And there hadn't been any of that. There hadn't been any sort of charm and respect. I wouldn't say it had been disrespectful, but I could tell that the Takashimaya people felt unloved or unappreciated. So I spent some time with them, as well as with the Georg Jensen team. I put a presentation together. I came back to see Georg Jensen in Denmark, and I said, look, you need to, long term, you need to get out of this joint venture. But it's going to be difficult because your main business customer is Takashimaya. So you don't want to lose that. They've got some great customers and really, really good business. But if you want to build the brand in Japan, you need to do it now independently. And various other things. And I said, also, I think it would be a good idea when you take the next step, probably you need to hire a foreigner as head of the company, because you're going to need to make a lot of change and make a lot of change quite quickly. And it might be easier for a foreigner to do that than a Japanese person. And
you felt that from that time in Japan, that you realized, because Takashimaya is very solid, it's like one of the princes of retail in Japan, not going to change things quickly, that the uncomfortable truths, any disappearing of people would be very hard for them to do, and you just instinctively felt that would be easier for a sort of a more neutral person to do that?
I did, and even one or two of the Japanese people, even a person from Takashimaya, had very privately confided in me and suggested that. That might be a better way, completely off the record as a friendly advice, not to be quoted, over a beer in a izakaya type situation. Yes, I could tell that it would be not an impossible task, but it would take much longer for a standard, Japanese executive to make all of those changes that needed to be done. In the team there, rather than having traditional marketing trained people, they put people in there who'd been working in the store on other brands, in merchandise departments and so on. So they weren't classically trained brand managers. They didn't know about brand positioning. They didn't know about pricing. They didn't know about managing gross margin and all those things that one learns at either universities doing marketing degrees or in a traditional marketing role. So I could see all of that really needed to be changed.
And that's typical though for Japan, because university graduates don't know anything, really, when they graduate, because they spend all their time doing club activities, don't do much study at all, and then the companies take them in and rotate them around. So to have that type of UK or European specialist skill set is very unlikely to happen here.
Yeah, it's true, and it's probably a significant weakness. And the other thing that I was thinking about too was that as I'd enjoyed this quite short time in Japan so much, I was hopeful that maybe Georg Jensen would consider appointing me as that foreigner. So I didn't put that in the presentation, but I verbally.
But the job description looked amazingly familiar.
Exactly. But they'd already had a plan. So they said, okay, we're interested in your strategy and proposal, and it seems to make sense. But we're pursuing other candidates for this role. So I went back to Paris, but I got a call, I guess about 5 months later. And I think Plan A had fallen through. And how about Plan B? Would I be prepared to take on a sort of 1-year contract initially just to see how it goes? I think there was a level of nervousness, as there often is, of hiring an outsider who doesn't speak Japanese, who hasn't got really significant Japanese experience to take on such a role. I could understand that. But I was excited to take this on. I came over. My wife was working for Lehman Brothers at the time, and Lehman Brothers relocated her to Japan.
Nice.
Before it all went wrong.
Yeah,
which is a later story. So it was a very exciting time, and my first task really was to work with the Takashimaya board on seeing how we could make a plan together to exit amicably. And this took an enormous amount of patience, resilience, was quite unpleasant sometimes, really got quite nasty sometimes. I don't think it was ever personal, but I think there was a lot of irritation at in terms of business size and scale. We were very small. We were sort of a small block for Takashimaya, the giant. But in terms of pride and what that meant of separating, there was a lot at stake for them. My strategy was to present to them eventually that this could be a celebration. This could be a celebration, how we present it to the press, that actually Takashimaya has done such a fantastic job of building the legs and foundation for Georg Jensen to flourish, that it's now strong enough to be independent. And we're very grateful for that. And we'll show that gratitude in the form of a payment. But we'll show that gratitude also in explaining to the press what a super job that you've done, that you're still our preferred partner to work with, that our flagship store is with yourselves in Nihonbashi. And they bought it. It worked. And I say they bought it in, straight up. It was sincere. That's exactly what we did. That's how we presented it to the press. And the business was retained, and they're still trading very well with Takashimaya today. That was a big success. That was my first major success in Japan. It gave me credibility with the group headquarters, but it also gave me credibility with the Japan team, because they didn't think that it was ever going to happen.
Did Takashimaya come out 100% out, or do they keep retaining some degree of shareholding? Or?
They came out 100% out.
100% out,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You never thought to keep them in, maybe 10%, 20%, so that they still have ownership of it, but they don't have control? That was never in your mind?
It wasn't. It wasn't what the board in Denmark wanted. They had tried to do that in a sort of scaled way, as sort of phase 2, and that had been rejected by Takashimaya. So their plan and their kind of remit to me now was, look, just get out, just get us out of this. So that's what we try to do. And I presented it to Takashimaya that, why be involved in such a small business? They'd done their work. If they retained a small amount, they're still going to have to invest time. They're still going to have to have probably a director on the board. So actually that wasn't really the issue for them. I think the issue for them was some conversations that had happened before my time that hadn't been taken well. And where was the appreciation for what we'd done? And I think they've been
losing
made to feel,
face.
Yes, losing face, which is that's losing face. People say that's an Asia thing. It's a global thing, losing face, but it's particularly important here. And yes, that was critical. So yeah, that was a major step. I was asked after that time then to take on a regional role. So I was looking after Japan, but I was also overseeing the Asia subsidiaries. But Japan was significantly, by some way, the biggest. So I was probably spending 70% of my time on the Japan business and working with the team. After trying to improve the relations with Takashimaya and get out of this JV, the next challenge was improving the business and trying to put some energy into the business. And that was really about changing the organization, changing some of the people, moving some of the people out, moving some new people in, changing positions. And that takes time. I mean, that takes time everywhere, but I think it takes even longer in Japan.
It's interesting, though, that they split your focus to be Asia plus Japan, when really you're trying to reestablish the business, which is like 150% requirement, but to actually give you 70%, for Japan and 30% for the other. I find that interesting that they didn't say, okay, they would just go for Japan, get that fixed, and then we'll give you Asia to look after later. But they actually got you from day one to split your focus a little bit.
Not from day one. I mean, that was after a year.
Was it okay?
That was after 12 months.
So you had time.
But I think you're making a valid point, and that happened actually again in my next role in Japan in Folli Follie. I think it's possibly convenient. You've got an able leader who's had some success in Japan. The other subsidiaries in Asia are a bit smaller. You've already got operation managers there. They could possibly be overseen. I think that was the thinking. Mm-hmm. But in truth, looking back, it might have been better to focus, 100% on Georg Jensen.
So that first role, you've been leading teams in Europe.
Yeah.
And you've now been given the responsibility. You've managed to get the Golden Bridge built,
yes,
so that Takashimaya could reverse over the bridge and go back to what they were doing. And now you've got charge of the team. So you've got to rebuild the business. You've got to start changing the people. What were some of the sort of key challenges from a leadership point of view that you've found you were facing?
Really injecting energy into the operational management of the organization. The problem, the business was fairly static. It wasn't in major decline, but it wasn't growing. The level of staff in retail stores was good, but that was misunderstood, which is very interesting. And that happened.
Misunderstood by who?
By the group headquarters.
Headquarters, okay.
And I noticed the same thing in Folli Follie, actually. It's very easy to say, the sales are down, it must be the salespeople's fault. It's the shop staff's fault. They're not selling. They're not doing their job. Actually, they were doing their job very well. I used to get numerous letters from customers congratulating on what wonderful staff we had. Their average transaction sizes were excellent. The customer experience level was excellent. What was missing for me was the level of engagement from the headquarters in Japan, putting plans together, developing product for the stores, putting together incentive plans, putting together basically their jobs of
campaigns,
campaigns, exactly. That was lacking in energy, that was lacking in excitement, and could have been just much better. It needed to level up. Part of that problem was lack of training of the people that were there. They'd sort of inherited positions, or they'd been moved sideways from Takashimaya. And part of the problem was some of the management a little bit sleepy, quite passive. So it was a huge task, because it wasn't just a one area. But the good news was I identified fairly quickly the problem's not in the stores. Actually, the stores were looking great. I'd spend a lot of time in stores. I always have done
Carrying
and
the
always
bag.
will. Carrying the bag, being in the stores, that's where the action is, not behind the computer. It's in the stores. That's where your competitors are. That's where your customers are. So I noticed in the stores the visual merchandising was very strong, was good. The staff were good. But the feedback from the staff was, we'd like to have more activities. We'd like to have more promotions. Why can't we do these kind of products or those kind of products? So I started to, I set up a product council of including 3 or 4 shop managers, a couple of shop staff, and then included 1 or 2 of the merchandise team from the office.
Sort of a brain trust on new product, yeah?
Exactly, yeah, of what was the most ideal product. So all of the products made in the global headquarters, but they were willing to modify or adapt for Japan, the Japan exclusive. And I think that was fun for those people to be involved. And it was quite meaningful when a year later, one of those products, a sort of miniature pendant, suddenly arrived that was exclusive Japan, and boom, took off and was the #1 best-selling product. That was very exciting for those people that had been
vindicated at last.
Yeah, at last we had the evidence that we could do it.
Did the Takashimaya staff depart when the JV ended, and they just walked back into Takashimaya somewhere? Or did they quit Takashimaya and stay with Georg Jensen? How did that work?
The Takashimaya management staff, they moved back into Takashimaya,
right.
yes.
So you had to completely replace the entire management stream.
Yes, yeah.
But the shop staff, that was different.
Shop staff all stayed.
All stayed, right?
Yeah, according to what
so
stores they were in.
you kept the core expertise level there.
Absolutely.
But the management stream was missing.
The management stream was missing. But it was a small, organisation. I think we had maybe 20 people in the office.
Okay, right. So it wasn't that big.
Yeah.
And was it difficult, when you're a relatively prestigious brand, does that make it easy to hire people to come in and replace those Takashimaya management team that had moved? Or is it, again, they wonder, oh, geez, you broke up with Takashimaya, is this going to be okay? Am I signing on to something that's going to go down because there's crazy foreigners, these Vikings are now running the show? How is that in terms of getting people to actually come on board?
It's a good question, because I was surprised in one or two instances. I did get that feedback from interviewees that, is the business okay because Takashimaya is not involved in it anymore? I had thought, perhaps a bit arrogantly or overconfidently, that Georg Jensen being on its own feet would be seen as more positive. Not by everybody, actually. Some people questioned and thought, because Takashimaya is not involved, maybe that's not a vote of no confidence. They don't have that backing or support anymore.
And was this at a point in time, there was like a bell rang, and suddenly a lot of established brands who'd been here in JVs with all different types of partners started to unwind. And everyone's sort of, at some point, they all seem to realise, we can do better in Japan if we run it directly rather than with our partners, even though we've had this partnership for a long, long time. And you just start to see it, brand after brand after brand start to unwind. Were you at the sort of lead part of that or in the middle of that, or where did you sort of sit there?
I think we were on the back end of that, actually.
Oh, at the end of it. So there was some good precedent
Tiffany
there.
had already, gone, and a number of other brands had already gone. I think it was at that time, Coach were just about to separate from Mitsui Sumitomo.
Right.
And they'd had a great partnership. I mean, they'd done I think that was a classic positive joint venture that had really worked. And that they had really put them on the map here with their Ginza flagship and so on. But I think we were at the tail end of those.
So there's plenty of precedent, though, for you to say, well, look, we saw this with Armani, we saw this with Gucci, we saw this with everybody else, and they've all done extremely well, and we expect to do the same. I guess you had that going for you.
Yes, absolutely. But it wasn't as easy as I thought to attract people and get the right people in. It's a luxury brand. It's quite specific. It was we wanted people to come in who really had an understanding of the brand, who liked the brand, who had an interest in Scandinavian design. You have to have that in order to be authentic, to have that sort of passion. So we were trying to, find those people, and they're not everywhere. But
and in that regard, I mean, I remember when I went to Copenhagen, when I went to the airport, it was like, my God, I really understand what they talk about Scandinavian design. Just the way they've got that airport done is like, wow. So it's hard I didn't have a conception of it till actually I went there and I saw that. So were you taking people back to Denmark and letting them immerse themselves in the design, in the sort of history, the whole context to help you do that? Or you're just trying to do it through you in Japan?
We were doing both for senior people. So for the marketing manager or marketing director, they would probably be going to Copenhagen 3 or 4 times a year.
Right.
We would have incentives for our top shop staff. We would take them. They'd spend a few days working in the flagship store in Copenhagen. We would do quite often press trips. I mean, every year we would do press trips. So it was a very important part of communicating what really Scandinavian design, Danish design was all about, and the brand was all about. Yes, it was an important part of it. Yeah.
So you managed to get them on board.
Yeah.
And then I guess things started to pick up from there.
They did, and particularly using these product councils where we started getting the Japan exclusives. We started adapting product. We started making tailor-made plans for certain retailers. We started doing more customer events, customer evenings at our Marinucci flagship store. So all of these things paid off, and the business started to grow. We were making a small profit, and we were in good shape. I'd put together a 5-year plan of where I saw the business growing to. And as part of that, I really wanted to upgrade a number of the stores in Japan and build a new flagship store. There was a little bit of pushback from that in that we were owned, or the company was owned at that time by a venture capital who was nearing the end of its time.
As soon as I hear that word, owned by venture capital firm, I'm thinking about they must have been really screwed down on the money.
Well, yes, fairly. I mean, and they'd been fairly patient. So I understand now, but for me then it was a little bit frustrating, and I decided to basically move on. That right. I couldn't see the forward investment.
Couldn't see the investment coming. Yeah. So how long were you with Georg Jensen then?
about 5 years.
Oh, well, you gave it a good 5 years.
Absolutely, yes. And put the business
you've done pretty well. Like 12, 7, 5
position.
is pretty good. You're not flitting from pillar to post here, job to job.
Exactly. And then actually I left Japan. I got an offer to go and work for Saks Fifth Avenue and run their business in the Middle East. So I moved from Japan to Dubai, and I was running Saks. We had a full-line department store in Dubai, a satellite men's store in Dubai. I built a new department store for them and opened it in Bahrain.
That must have been an amazing experience.
It really was. It was an incredible project, an incredible experience. I'm not sure I'd want to repeat it. It was very stressful, but it was very exciting.
10 years off your life right there.
Exactly. And, that gave me the chance to work on the other side of the fence. As my father had done, for years and years at Selfridges, and rather than working for a brand, be retailing multi-brands, and Saks do
was your father
luxury very
still
well.
alive at that time?
Yes, he was. Yes.
So is he giving you any son now? This is what you should do type of advice?
Very much so.
Good.
Very much so. It was. He was a great mentor actually, and he was very excited for me to be doing that.
Yeah, he felt, he finally came around.
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, he never managed to visit the store. But I sent him a lot of pictures and so on. But it was what I enjoyed about that role and that job. It really emphasized to me how much retail is the entertainment business. At 10 o'clock in the morning, as it was then when we opened the store, it was showtime.
Right. What does
really,
showtime mean in Dubai compared to showtime in Tokyo?
It's the same. It's the same in that, when I say a showtime, it's so immediate. Retail is now.
Yep.
So you make a decision, possibly in your office or on the shop floor at 10 o'clock in the morning. It could be executed at 10:15.
Right.
You're making a change, you're moving the merchandise. Okay, we're going to change this promotion today, now. Let's do it now.
Right.
It's
immediate.
It's immediate and very present, and very exciting from that point of view. So I loved that. Sadly, I didn't love Dubai, so it was never going to be a long-term thing. I didn't adapt well to living there. I think it's quite a difficult post, particularly moving from Japan to there. So I decided after a year I wanted to come back to Japan. I felt there was unfinished business here. And I wanted to, prove myself that I could do something good in another brand here. An opportunity came up, and I was approached, and I joined Folli Follie to run the Japan business as their president. So I came back. I think this is 2010. What a situation that company was in when I joined. It was really in the doldrums.
The whole country was in the doldrums after Lehman, right?
The whole country was in the doldrums, but the business at that time was hemorrhaging. It really wasn't doing well, and it had grown up, and again actually as a joint venture, and done extremely well. It had become a very big brand. And then I think the company had bought them out maybe in 2008. I don't think they'd done the due diligence so well. So when they bought them out, they lost quite a lot of talent inside the company. And then the business really suffered very quickly afterwards. So I was given a blank piece of paper.
We talk about, they would have done due diligence on the numbers.
Yeah.
But it's very hard, if you don't know Japan, to do due diligence on the people, because Japanese people are not very good at representing themselves as talent or capable. They're very humble. And so you might think, we get rid of this lot, we'll get another bunch, no problem. but it's not that easy, and they have all these contacts and lifetime relationships that have been built up that when Japanese staff who've been around for a long time move, well, they're taking a lot with them that you may not necessarily appreciate from outside, because we're much probably more transactional. We're moving companies, our staff are moving companies. We all we get it, we all move on, and we do a professional job.
Yeah.
But in Japan, it tends to be less of that, isn't it? It's more like the roots are there and the loyalty is there and the contacts stay. And so when you just say, well, okay, yes, numbers look good, but we don't need this lot. Okay, maybe that's what you mean when you say the due diligence is missing.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid. And often mistakes could be made, even looking at performance issues on staff. It's quite easy for somebody to say, "Oh, this person's numbers are off." Obviously they've gone off the boil. Get rid of them. That can actually be fundamentally a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
You need to dive a bit deeper and find out, well, why are the numbers off? What's really happened? What's going on in that person's life? Because it's not just them. If they leave, they undermine the team around them potentially, or people that really liked working with them, or they might just not be in the right place anymore. I don't mean company. I mean the position. That maybe they just need to. We need to move accounts. But losing people in Japan, losing years of experience and the contacts, like you say, really can have quite significant impact in all kinds of ways that you don't really think about when you're just looking at the planogram, on the screen. So I had this challenge, but I relished those kinds of challenges. It was quite exciting, and I needed to reorganize the company. I needed to see how we could move the business back into a positive. There were too many stores. That was part of the problem. So we needed to.
So you had that 5-year plan in the drawer there.
Yes.
From like 3 companies ago. So I know exactly. Where's that plan? Oh, here we go. Just change the name. Here we go.
Not quite as simple as that, but in terms of the thinking, though, it's the same. It's looking through store by store, seeing if it's viable, seeing what the problems are. Is the headcount too high? What is the sales per foot? And can it ever add up? What's really the problem? If the business doubles next year and it's still losing money, it probably means you shouldn't be in the store. So that was the exercise that I undertook, both physically visiting all of the stores and then, in the office with the finance people, really looking in detail at the numbers.
So this is a bit similar to, again, in this case, you had probably people had been removed when you came in, so you had to restock and go out and get people excited about working for the brand. A little bit similar maybe in the case of, with Georg Jensen where Takashimaya people left, so there's a gap there. So again, was it by this time after Lehman, was it easier to hire people because people were looking to move, or sort of job mobility had improved by that time, or no?
Actually, it was a very difficult challenge because there'd been so many management changes in the company, and there'd been some cases of management abuse, just really poor people management going on in the company.
So what does management abuse look like? Is this screaming at people?
Yes, well, general harassment.
Right.
Yes, shouting at people, table thumping, telling people not to talk to certain other people, tribalism inside a company. I mean, all kinds of things. So that had affected the reputation. Headhunters or recruitment agencies didn't want to send people to the company.
The reputation was that bad.
They told me, David, you're really on a hiding to nothing here. It's very tough. We don't want to send people because, we get complaints. They don't last long in the company and so on. So I say, well, look, that was then. This is now.
And these are extremely pragmatic people in the recruiting business, if I can put it that way.
I know.
Let me use the word pragmatic, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
So that's amazing that they would knock back a fee because the reputation was that bad. That is incredible.
Yeah. So had to do a lot of rebuilding. But I think one of my strengths and one of the things that I really like to try to bring, and I think it's a key part of leadership, is bringing energy into a company, really genuinely making efforts and plans and actions that make people see that they can enjoy coming to work, make people want to come to work, make people have fun at work and enjoy doing their work. These kind of things.
How do you do that?
Talking to people,
right?
Putting people together in meetings, doing skip-level meetings. I'd have mini breakfast meetings with
So when you say
junior
skip
staff.
level, you mean not just the same hierarchical, mixing it up?
Mixing it up, but also I'd have meetings with shop staff, for example, but without the AGIO managers there, without the sales manager there.
Right.
And I'd explain to the sales manager, look, you're not there because I'm not going there to check on you. I'm not doing this to undermine you. I'm doing this so that I can connect as head of the company with these people who are, front of house.
Key people.
Yeah.
Did they believe you?
I don't know, but I would tell them, and then, the proof's in the pudding. So afterwards, they would probably have checked
they'd interrogate
and have
them.
discovered that I wasn't talking about, does your boss come into work on time? I wasn't asking silly questions like that. So I guess it was okay. So I'd do all kinds of activities like that. I'd have a lunch with some of the people in the office, 2 or 3 at a time, sometimes one-to-one, at all levels. Because relatively small company, I think in Folli Follie there's about 40 or 50 people in the office. So I just make sure that over time, and not too long a time, over a relatively short time, everyone in the company got to know me in some way. By this time, my Japanese had improved. It's not, it should be, but it's not fluent. But it's good enough to communicate. It's good enough to have a lunch with someone who's not speaking English, and I can communicate. I'd go and have meetings with shop staff and communicate.
And I can imagine.
So that was a door opener as well.
Not too many shop staff would speak English well, because they're very focused on a domestic market. Some people in the head office, perhaps.
Yeah.
So that ability to have a conversation, have some communication, forget about linguistic purity, but have some communication directly
Exactly.
would have been very impactful, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it made a big difference when I started to use my Japanese, because people could say, also had a feeling like, oh, he's not just here for 5 minutes. He's made the effort.
He's made some commitment here.
Yeah, language commitment. So I was doing all of these things in overdrive at Folli Follie to try and sort of put the house back in order. Ultimately, we had to close quite a number of stores. That was painful and involved also, unfortunately, having to say goodbye to a number of staff who were working in those stores. But the business changed quite quickly. Within 12 months, we'd had 3 years of decline, and suddenly the business started growing again, month on month.
So you're looking like a superstar back at headquarters. And where is headquarters for Folli Follie?
Headquarters was quite demanding, actually. I think I was seen as a not necessarily superstar, but I was seen as, we can do this. I think there was a level of belief in the team in Japan when I got everyone together for a sort of a town hall and said, look, guys, last month, 20% up. First time we've done this in 3 years. It's not an accident. This didn't happen by chance. This happened through really good work in these stores and these stores. Well done you, and
keep going.
Exactly. And yes, I think in the headquarters they were
So where is the headquarters located?
Greece.
In Greece.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Athens, yeah.
So this is interesting. You've worked for the French, you've worked for the Danes, and now you're working for the Greeks.
Now I was working for the Greeks, yeah.
So that's interesting.
And actually then a similar thing happened. I think perhaps they were pleased, maybe they were convinced that the results were so strong. They asked me to take on a regional role, not for all of Asia, but most Asia subsidiaries, except China, Hong Kong. So Korea, Taiwan, Hawaii, Guam, and Singapore. And we had a very small operation in Thailand as well. But again, my main focus was Japan and continuing to build the business there and get it into a profitable situation.
So how long were you there with Folli Follie?
9 years.
9 years. You're
9 years in total.
Very good. So what happens after that? Is that when you go to Le Creuset? Is that?
Yes, yeah. I left with Folli Follie. I should have mentioned too. We had Links of London, which is a British jewellery brand, where was much more luxury jewellery, and we had a few stores in Japan. So yes, I left Folli Follie 2019 and joined Le Creuset as commercial director for Asia. So I was overseeing the subsidiaries, initially overseeing the subsidiaries, 9 subsidiaries across Asia. That role transitioned fairly quickly, probably after 6 months, into managing director for Asia. And I was directly then managing the Japan affiliates. We didn't have a president for Japan, so I was doing the Japan business and then overseeing the other 8 subsidiaries. So this was a fascinating business too. It was probably in better condition, I would say, than the previous company that I'd worked in, or certainly when I joined. A very well appreciated brand in Japan.
Very well presented too. When you go into the Le Creuset stores, the merchandising, the way it's presented, the colours.
Very colourful, yeah.
Very, very nice.
Yeah. And so some good shop staff. But one of the similarities that I did see was that the business seemed to have reached a ceiling 4 or 5 years ago and had been fairly static, maybe some small decline. And I sensed in the head office a certain level of inertia, a certain lack of energy.
And Le Creuset's head office is where?
Just around the corner from Tokyo American Club.
Sorry, global headquarters.
In Switzerland.
Switzerland, right? Yeah. So now you're with the Swiss.
Lugano.
Okay.
Well, actually, not
South
really.
Africans,
I think South African owner.
Yeah.
French brand.
Right.
I mean, the factory where the pots are made is in France, as it has been since 1925. So the culture, I would say, was European. And yes, and very much French brand, but international European sort of group management. The challenge in Japan, and I think this is a key, leadership issue everywhere, but especially in Japan, is really being aware of who's impacting the business positively and negatively, who's sucking energy out of the room, and who's bringing the energy. And I felt that there was a mix of that in joining Le Creuset.
And is this an internal power struggle between ambitious people? Is just rogue individuals who, for whatever reason, are in the company and probably shouldn't be in the company? And what is going on there?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say it's rogue. I think it stemmed, which it did in other businesses I've worked in too, at senior management turnover. Too much turnover. There'd been a number of general managers over a short period of time. So that's not building stability for a leadership team. And that's also not driving. Some people don't need to be driven. Some people are self-driven and they're great managers and they get on and perform. Other people can perform, but they need to be pushed and they need to be, set the goals and managed. And I think it was just the mix of not having that, having a little bit of a revolving door syndrome, and the one or two people who'd performed previously, but who had definitely, gone off the boil, and who I had to, really work very closely with to say, look, I can see that you've done some, good work in the past. Doesn't seem to be happening now. What are we going to do about it? And really explaining to them too that I wasn't going to leave it at that. That I was on a mission to improve the company, improve the business, and I wasn't going to go away.
Don't start looking at the clock, wondering. I wonder when David will get on the plane and go somewhere else. We'll see another one out the door, and yes, we'll still be here.
Well, it's that classic, Japanese thing. One of the lessons that we know in Japan is that hai, or even wakarimashita, does not mean, yes, I'm going to do it. All it means is I've just listened to what you've told me.
Yes.
It doesn't mean I'm engaged, I'm going to go and do it. And there were a couple of those people that I really needed to work very closely with to say, look, we've really got to make a plan. I need you to explain back to me now, what are you going to do?
Is that because sometimes in Japan you'll get very loyal, conscientious people who disagree with the direction the company's going. They disagree with the management thinking or the way they're treating the brand or how they're treating the customers. And they, not sabotage, but they in effect, they withdraw their services to pursue that line because they're in disagreement with it. Is that the type of problem you're facing, or is it something else?
No, I've certainly experienced that. And yes, that wasn't the overall problem. That was I identified with one of the managers had that issue, and that can be quite common. But I think one of the key things about leading is you've got to be persistent. You've got to repeat yourself. You can't assume that you've done the dog and pony show, or you've done your presentation and explained to people. You can't then walk away and say, right, I've ticked that off.
Yeah.
That isn't leading. You've really got
which
to
you would do in
follow up.
which you would do in a Western civil organization. You would have that. You'd get in the room, you'd have the explanation, you'd explain, this is where we're going, we got it, and we'd all go and do it, presumably. Normally it's like that. But Japan, you're right, it's not that simple, is it, to actually get people on board with where we're going here and actually understanding it.
I don't think it's necessarily a sort of, well, they don't understand it so well. I think one of the great things in Japan with working with Japanese is if you are able to explain in crystal clear clarity how we're going to do this job, what your role is in doing that, and specifically what you've got to do, what your piece in the chain is, what your accountability is going to be. People say they don't, some don't like accountability, but explaining that's how it is, that's what you're going to do, and that's what you're going to be part of. If the person really understands, and you've taken the time to go through it with them, in the end, the execution is often flawless. The execution is often much better than anywhere else. But you've got to go through those steps. You can't achieve that in a PowerPoint presentation. You've really got to make sure, and you've got to make sure that those people talk it back to you before they go away. Explain exactly what you're going to do in this, please, because every week we're going to follow up on this.
Double check.
And see how we're doing. So if you've misunderstood something, we're going to really waste time. So let's take the time now to do that.
Clear.
And that's quite a powerful mechanism to get people engaged.
And
you can do that one-to-one, you can do that with small groups.
Yeah, you mentioned that some people resist accountability. You know, for a lot of people watching and listening to this program, they'd be thinking, what? Japanese are resisting accountability? How could anybody in any firm, any country, resist accountability? But why are you mentioning they're actually resisting or not so keen on having accountability?
It's just a common situation that I've seen time and time again from all levels of staff. You know, accountability isn't necessarily just for manager. You know, someone coming to work who's paid a salary also should have some level of accountability of what they're supposed to do. When you actually explain that to somebody, and even managers, even senior managers, and say, your role is to do this, okay? Yes, I understand my role, but you're accountable for this. You're accountable for this area. If something goes wrong in that store or something goes wrong in this, you know, particular situation, you're on the line here. You've got to be responsible for that. You own that. Very often, suddenly, the eyes get a bit wider and it's a bit, oh, hold on a minute.
Hang on, wait a minute. They didn't sign on for being accountable for that.
Yeah.
Why is that in Japan? I mean, I've come across this too. I'm just wondering, why do you think that is?
You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that if you show a degree of patience and even sympathy to say, oh, do you not like the accountability part? Well, if you don't like that, maybe you're not really in the right place. But actually, it can be quite good. You know, that's your role as a manager. And I try to explain to management teams, you know, you're not just here to take the salary and, you know, do the 9 to 5 every day. Hopefully, you're here to improve. Not just improve the business for Le Creuset or Folli Follie or whoever it might be, but improve yourself. So that actually, at the end of this year, working together, you will be a better product yourself. You can market yourself because you've learned those extra skills. You know how to do that. You know how to close stores or open stores, or you've shown that you can do that. So you're improving all the time. That's making you more marketable. That's raising your equity level. And I think when you talk to people like that and get them to see that, and it's not just, you know, BS, that there's genuine meaning for that, they'll think, oh, okay, oh, that could be quite good then. That's
quite a new concept, isn't it, for Japanese staff to think about increasing their equity, you know, through raising their skill level. I think the idea of loyalty and continuity, these are much more high values, you know, embrace values. So that must have been a new concept. But, you know, did you find that you're able to tap into your teams for ideas, or did you find that you tended to be the source of ideas and they became the source of improvement on that idea or the localization of that idea in the execution of that idea? Or were you able to actually get fresh ideas from the teams, be it Georg Jensen or Folli Follie or Le Creuset?
Yes, I was able to, but it's not easy. I mean, I've sat in a room, as I'm sure you have, and I'm sure many managers or GMs or business leaders have, where you could be sitting in a meeting for an hour and think, it sounds like I'm the only one speaking here. Or I'm the only one sort of offering.
What's that noise? Oh, that's me.
Yeah. And then I would stop. And I think as I've developed as a leader or developed in maturity, I'd just stop and I would honestly say, guys, hello? You're the leadership team. I mean, this is particularly important with the management team. I'm supposed to be conducting the orchestra. So, and of course, I'm happy to get my jacket off and join you and contribute with the ideas and stuff. But it's no good if I'm just sitting here talking. If you want to be on this team, if you want to be part of the leadership team, you need to be accountable and contribute. And And then at other levels, more general levels, I'd sit in meetings with much wider group and say, look, we can't have 30 people in this meeting room if only 2 or 3 people are contributing. What's the point? The rest of you we can just send an email to. This is sort of auto management. We've got to get out of this. If you're coming into this meeting, there needs to be some contribution. There needs to be a purpose for this. It's not just because it always happens on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. That's not a good enough reason. So I would disrupt those. And I'd say, okay, this meeting is cancelled from now on. We're not going to do this. And I'd talk to the managers and say, look, we've got to change this. You've got to change this up. And I don't know all the ideas. I'm not a cookware expert. That was a new category for me, which I really enjoyed learning about. But there were much more knowledgeable people in the company about those products than I was. So my ideas were probably pretty average. So I would insist, and I'd insist that some of the younger, perhaps more junior merchandising staff and so on were present, and I would, really try to focus on them to say, please put forward your ideas. But it's not easy because people don't want to speak out, particularly if their boss is sitting there and so on.
Senior,
that's very
older.
hard, very hard. But again, it is possible, though. It is possible. You've got to insist that it happens. I think it's also one of the luxuries of being a foreigner leader, which is quite different than being a Japanese leader. So, sometimes people said to me in the early days in Japan, oh, you need to follow the Japanese rules, you need to follow the Japan culture of business and so on. Actually, that's nonsense. You do need to respect Japanese business culture, of course. You need to respect that. But it doesn't mean to say that you have to turn Japanese. Actually, there are a lot of benefits being a foreigner, that you can break the rules. You can take some shortcuts that a Japanese leader wouldn't be forgiven for.
And push faster.
And push faster. And you're not seen as, oh, that's terrible, not allowed to do. And actually, that can be quite fun for staff. Particularly more junior level staff, to say, "Oh wow, we don't have to, follow exactly the samurai code." But I think it's an important part of using that benefit, if you like, that you have as a foreigner, that you can go a bit quicker, you can be less orthodox. And be forgiven for breaking some of the norms, as long as you do show the level of respect to everybody and to the culture.
So if we take that a bit further, we imagine someone is going to be sent to Japan, they've never been here before, or they've visited on holiday or something. Oh, I love Japan, where's the sushi? Great. But now you actually got to work here, you've got to run an operation or a business here. What would be some other pieces of advice you'd have for someone in that role?
Take time. Take more time. I'd say to anyone starting a new job anywhere, take the time and listen, but really, really listen, actively listen in Japan and learn, and realize what's being said and what's on the surface. It's not always the obvious thing. Try to look deeper, look into the detail, look carefully at body language. What's not said is just as important as what is said. Really take that time, try to show genuine interest in the people that you're talking with. Try and show them that you want to learn. Try and show them that you want to get an understanding from them, that you want to engage with them. And show that you're willing to take the time that it does take to start developing trust. You can't develop trust in one meeting.
No.
But those signals that you start with in meeting one mean something. Follow through on those. Be consistent. respect everybody, talk to everybody. But most importantly, listen and ask questions and keep asking. Don't stop asking questions. That's the way that you'll find out what's going on. You won't be told everything.
No.
That's when, in fact, one of the early lessons I learned in my first job in Japan, I'd get quite frustrated sometimes with the senior manager I was working with and say, well, why didn't you tell me that? He said, well, you didn't ask. And
how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to ask about everything, right?
But information is not, I don't think you get too much information syndrome in Japan.
No.
Information is withheld. I could never quite work out whether it was withheld mischievously or just withheld because, well, he didn't ask that.
I
But
think
the
the
lesson
boss,
from it is keep asking.
I think the boss is always the last one to find out in Japan. Like if there's trouble, you only really hear about it when it can't be suppressed anymore. Things will get suppressed or disappeared or not raised to the surface.
Yeah.
Which as a boss is always frustrating because you've got the power, the money, the authority to fix a lot of things if you know about it. And if it's left to the last moment, by the time you hear about it, it's usually not fixable because it's sort of got to such a stage or such a size that you really time's passed, to do something about that. So it is a tricky thing. Get people actually tell you, hey, look, we screwed this up, or this didn't go as it should have gone, or we made a mistake, or whatever. For people to have the confidence to own up, to fess up, because in Japan, generally they all tend to be good at being ninja and hiding everything rather than exposing everything. So it is tough.
Yeah. I would often try to use my assistant, who would often perform a role as a translator sometimes in meetings, as a sort of confidant, not as a spy, but as somebody who could take the temperature, test the temperature in the office, and who would tell me something's perhaps not right in this area or that area, but not telling tales, but who would just wave a flag sometimes. And that hasn't always worked, but sometimes that's been successful. And what I've also found helps avoid those situations where you haven't been told until it's too late, is in just making sure that you're consistently managing by walking around. You are consistently, every day, you are visible in the office, you're talking to all levels of staff, you've got an informal, perhaps lunch with a small group from IT, you've got an informal get-together or coffee with the finance team, and that those are important parts of your business. It's very easy when suddenly it's budget time or suddenly you've got a new launch and you're just immersed in that completely. But it's not a good idea to allow those other day-to-day catch-ups, those day-to-day informal gatherings to fall by the wayside. If you do, then there is a danger sometimes of not being so engaged and connected with everybody and what's going on in the team. It's more difficult to do that, of course, in bigger organizations, but the principle of it, even in a large organization, remains the same. Yeah.
Well, we could go on. I can see we could spend hours going further and further and further with this, David. So thank you. I'm going to bring it to a close now, but it's been fascinating, and I really appreciate you've brought some really great insights from that retail experience you've had here, running businesses here across 3 different dimensions, and also to contrast it with the work you've done outside of Japan as well. So very fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.